She stood alone at the edge of the ballroom, and no one looked at her. Not truly, not with warmth. The candlelight shimmered across silk gowns and glittering jewels, and laughter floated through the air like music, but Alara remained perfectly still, a painted figure in a sea of movement. She held a glass of champagne she had not tasted. Her fingers were cold. Across the room, her husband danced with Lady Cordelia Whitmore. Alexander Ashford, the Duke of Ashford, moved with effortless grace. His dark hair was brushed back, his expression unreadable, his eyes never once searching for his wife. He held Lady Cordelia's hand as if she were made of porcelain, and when she laughed at something he said, Alara felt the sound like a small cut beneath her ribs. She had chosen her gown carefully that evening. Deep emerald silk, modest but elegant. She had hoped he might notice. He had not. Whispers rustled behind her. Poor thing, married 6 months and he still looks through her. It was a transaction, everyone knows. Her father's money for his title. There was never affection. She must have known. A merchant's daughter marrying a duke. What did she expect? Alara's throat tightened, but she did not turn. She had learned over these aching months to wear stillness like armor. She had not known. That was the cruelest part. When her father had told her of the match, she had been hopeful. The Duke of Ashford was respected, serious, undeniably handsome. She had allowed herself to dream of quiet companionship slowly deepening into something more. She had imagined fireside conversations, shared smiles across a dining table, a hand reaching for hers in the dark. Instead, she received polite distance, cold courtesy, a husband who spoke to her as if she were a guest he had not invited. And now she knew why. Earlier that evening, she had stepped onto the terrace to escape the stifling heat of the ballroom. The garden below had been quiet, bathed in silver moonlight. She had leaned against the stone balustrade and breathed in the cool air, trying to steady the trembling in her chest. Then she heard his voice. Alexander was standing on the path below with his steward, Mr. Finch. They did not see her. The vines curled thick around the terrace edge, hiding her from view. The estate was drowning, Alexander said, his tone flat and tired. You know as well as I do. The marriage was a necessity. I did what I had to do to save Ashford. Sentiment had no place in it. And the Duchess, Mr. Finch asked quietly, does she know? A long pause. Alara's heart hammered. She knows enough, Alexander replied. She understands it was an arrangement. I have given her a title, a home, everything required. She should not expect more. The words were not shouted. They were not cruel in their delivery. They were simply final, a door closing, a lock turning. Alara had pressed her hand to her mouth and stepped back into the shadows. She did not cry. She felt the tears gather, hot and sharp, but she refused to let them fall. She had already shed too many tears for a man who viewed her as a duty. She straightened her spine and walked back into the ballroom alone. Now, standing among strangers who whispered her humiliation like gossip, she made a quiet decision. She would stop hopping. She would stop waiting at the window for his carriage. She would stop choosing gowns in colors he might like. She would stop reading meaning into every glance, every brief word, every accidental brush of his hand. She would become exactly what he believed her to be, a duchess in title only, a partner in duty, nothing more. And she would never, ever let him see her break. The carriage ride home was silent. Alexander sat across from her, his gaze fixed on the dark window. The street lamps slid past in golden blurs. He did not ask if she had enjoyed the evening. He did not comment on the whispers, though she knew he must have heard them. He simply existed in his own world, a world that did not include her. Alara looked at his profile. The strong jaw, the straight nose, the mouth that rarely smiled. Once she had found him beautiful in a distant, unapproachable way. Now she felt nothing but a hollow ache. When they reached Ashford Hall, he helped her down from the carriage with the same detached courtesy he would offer a stranger. His hand was warm, steady, and then gone. "Good night, Alara," he said, already turning toward his study. She did not answer. She climbed the stairs alone, her footsteps soft on the marble, and when she reached her chambers she closed the door and stood in the darkness for a long moment. Then she walked to her writing desk, opened a small drawer, and removed a letter she had been saving. It was from her childhood friend, Lord Nathaniel Trelawney, who had written to say he would be passing through the county and hoped to call on her. She had hesitated to respond, because a part of her had still hoped Alexander might care. That hope was gone now. She sat down, dipped her quill in ink, and wrote a simple reply. "I would be very glad to see you." The change began the next morning. Alara woke early and did not linger in her chambers hoping Alexander might appear at breakfast. She dressed in a simple morning gown, pinned her hair without the help of a maid, and walked downstairs with a plan forming in her mind. Ashford Hall was vast and beautiful, but its tenants' cottages were in disrepair. She had noticed this during her first weeks as Duchess, but she had been too consumed by her aching heart to act. Now she needed purpose. She needed something to pour her love into, since the man she married had no use for it. She summoned the housekeeper, Mrs. Pemble, and asked for a list of tenant families. Mrs. Pemble, a kind woman with silver hair and knowing eyes, hesitated. "Your Grace, the Duke has always managed the estate affairs himself. He may not wish." "The Duke," Alara said quietly, "does not concern himself with my daily activities. I am merely visiting families, offering company. There is no rule against kindness, is there?" Mrs. Pemble studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "No, Your Grace, there is not." And so Alara began. She visited the Miller family first. Their cottage roof leaked and the children had coughs. She arranged for a thatcher and sent for medicine from the village. She visited old Mr. Grange, whose wife had died the previous winter, and sat with him while he talked about his grief. She brought bread and preserves to the widow Thorne and her 3 small daughters. She listened. She helped. The tenants were surprised at first, then grateful, then fiercely loyal. Word spread quickly. The new Duchess was not like the old lords. She cared. Each evening, Alara returned to Ashford Hall tired but steadier. She no longer waited for Alexander at dinner. She ate early or late, depending on her schedule. She filled her days with purpose. And slowly, the hollow ache began to fade. She did not notice, at first, that Alexander was noticing her absence. It happened one evening, nearly 3 weeks after the ball. Alara had spent the afternoon at the village school, helping the teacher with the younger children. She returned home with mud on her hem and her hair slipping from its pins, her cheeks flushed from the walk. She was laughing softly at something one of the children had said, a genuine sound that felt foreign and wonderful. She stopped when she saw Alexander standing at the foot of the staircase. He was still in his riding clothes, his boots dusty, his expression unreadable. He looked at her as if seeing something unexpected. "You are not here for tea," he said. It was not an accusation. It was not a question. It was simply a statement delivered with the same flat tone he always used. Alara met his eyes. "No, I was in the village." A pause. "You have been spending a great deal of time in the village." Yes, she did not elaborate, she did not apologize, she simply waited. Alexander's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He seemed to want to say something more, but he did not. Instead, he gave a short nod and walked past her toward his study. Alara watched him go, and for the first time she did not feel the urge to follow. Nathaniel Trelawney arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon, riding a handsome gray mare and carrying a bouquet of wildflowers he had picked along the road. Alara saw him from the drawing-room window and felt a genuine smile lift her lips. She hurried outside before the footman could announce him, and when Nathaniel dismounted and saw her, his face broke into a wide grin. "Alara, good heavens, look at you. Marriage suits you, you look like sunshine." She laughed and accepted the flowers. "You have always been a flatterer, Nathaniel." I speak only truth, he said, his blue eyes warm with affection. They had known each other since childhood when his family's estate bordered her father's country house. He was like a brother, a confidant, a piece of a simpler past. They walked together through the gardens, and Alara found herself talking more freely than she had in months. She told him about the tenants, the school, the small victories that had become her lifeline. She did not speak of Alexander. She did not need to. Nathaniel's eyes told her he understood more than he said. They were sitting on the stone bench near the fountain when Alexander appeared. Alara saw him first, a dark figure emerging from the house, striding across the lawn with a purpose that made her heart stutter. His face was harder than usual, his gaze fixed on Nathaniel. "Lord Trelawney," he said, his voice cool, "I was not informed we had a guest." Nathaniel rose and bowed politely. "Your Grace, forgive the surprise. I was passing through and could not resist calling on an old friend." "Old friend." Alexander repeated the words as if testing them. His eyes flicked to Alara and something flashed in their depths, something sharp. "I see." Alara stood slowly. "Lord Trelawney and I have known each other since childhood. He was kind enough to bring me flowers from the road." She held up the bouquet, and Alexander's gaze dropped to it. His expression did not change, but the air around him seemed to tighten. "How thoughtful," he said. "I trust you will join us for dinner, my lord." It was not a question. It was a command wrapped in courtesy. Nathaniel smiled, easy and unbothered. "I would be honored." Dinner that evening was a study in silent warfare. Alexander sat at the head of the table, carving his roast with surgical precision. He asked Nathaniel polite questions about his travels, his estate, his family. His voice never rose above a measured, controlled tone, but every glance he sent toward Alara felt like a brand. She did not understand it. He did not want her. He had made that clear. And yet, the way he watched her now, the way his knuckles whitened when Nathaniel made her laugh, suggested something else entirely. Jealousy, possessiveness. She did not know what to call it, but it unsettled her. After dinner, Nathaniel excused himself to the guest quarters, and Alara moved toward the staircase, eager to escape the suffocating tension. But Alexander's voice stopped her. "You enjoyed yourself this evening." She turned. He stood in the doorway of the drawing room, his cravat loosened, his eyes shadowed. "Yes," she said carefully, "it was pleasant to see an old friend." "An old friend who brings you flowers." His tone was quiet, but there was an edge beneath it. "You never mentioned him before." Alara lifted her chin. "You never asked." The words hung between them. She saw something flicker in his face, surprise, perhaps, or guilt. She could not tell. He was too guarded, too accustomed to hiding. "I am your husband," he said finally. "You are the Duke of Ashford," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "You gave me a title and a home, everything required. You told me not to expect more. I am simply following your wishes." His face went pale. "You heard that?" "Yes," she did not look away. "I heard everything." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The clock on the mantel ticked, a steady, indifferent heartbeat. Then Alara turned and walked up the stairs. She did not look back. But if she had, she would have seen Alexander Ashford standing alone in the lamplight, his hands clenched at his sides, his expression raw with something that looked terrifyingly like regret. The days that followed were colder than any winter Alara had known. She and Alexander moved through the house like two ships passing in fog, their paths crossing only briefly, their conversations reduced to the barest civilities. She no longer sought him out. She no longer lingered in rooms where he might appear. She had stopped hopping, and in the absence of hope, she had found a strange, quiet strength. She expanded her work among the tenants. She began organizing a fund to repair the village roofs. She spent afternoons reading to children, evenings writing letters to charitable societies. She was seen, respected, valued, not as a duke's ornament but as a woman of substance. And Alexander watched. She felt his gaze now in ways she never had before, from the window of his study as she walked to the stables, across the dinner table on the rare nights she joined him, a quiet, heavy presence that followed her like a shadow. He did not speak of Nathaniel's visit, but she knew he had not forgotten. She sometimes caught him staring at the wildflowers which she had placed in a vase in the morning room, their petals slowly drying. One evening she returned from the village to find a small leather-bound book on her writing desk. It was a volume of poetry, the pages worn, a ribbon marking a passage about enduring love. There was no note, no indication of who had left it. Her heart twisted painfully, but she did not allow herself to hope. She placed the book in a drawer and did not mention it. A week later, she found a new shawl draped over her chair in the library. Soft cashmere, the deep blue of a twilight sky. Mrs. Pemble said the Duke had ordered it from London. Alara held the shawl for a long moment, her fingers tracing the fine weave. Then she folded it carefully and set it aside. Gifts could not mend a heart that had been told it was merely a transaction. She did not wear it. The morning of the accident, the sky was heavy with unshed rain. Alara had ridden to the Miller cottage to check on the youngest child, who had been feverish. She was inside, spooning broth to the little girl, when she smelled smoke. At first she thought it was the hearth, then she heard screaming. She ran outside and saw flames licking the roof of the barn next door. The dry hay had caught fire, and the wind was pushing the blaze toward the cottage. The widow Thorne's children were huddled in the yard, crying. The widow herself was nowhere in sight. She went back inside for the baby. One of the children sobbed. Alara did not think, she ran. The cottage was already filling with smoke. She crouched low, coughing, her eyes streaming, and found the widow collapsed near the cradle, overcome by the fumes. The baby was wailing, red-faced and terrified. Alara grabbed the child with one arm and dragged the widow with the other. The heat was monstrous. The beams above them groaned. She stumbled out into the yard just as the roof caved in behind her, a roar of splintering wood and fire. Villagers were running toward her, shouting. Hands pulled her away, took the baby, laid the widow on the grass. Alara's knees gave out. She knelt in the mud, coughing so hard she could barely breathe, her gown singed, her hands shaking. That was when she heard the horse. Hooves thundered down the lane, and then Alexander was there, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped, his face white with terror. She had never seen him look like that, not in all their months of marriage. His composure, his cold control, all of it had shattered. Alara, he was on his knees beside her, his hands gripping her shoulders, his voice raw. Alara, look at me. Are you hurt? Where are you hurt? She stared at him, dazed. I am not hurt. He pulled her against him without warning, his arms wrapping around her so tightly she could barely breathe. His body was trembling. She felt his heart pounding against her chest, wild and desperate. I thought you were inside, he choked. They said the Duchess went into the burning cottage. I thought I lost you, I thought. He could not finish. He buried his face in her hair, and she felt something wet against her temple. Tears, Alexander Ashford was crying. The world seemed to still around them. The fire crackled, the villagers murmured, but Alara heard only the ragged sound of her husband's breathing. After a long moment he pulled back just enough to look at her. His eyes were red, his face ravaged by fear. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing the soot from her cheeks. I cannot lose you, he said, his voice breaking. Alara, I cannot. She wanted to ask why. She wanted to demand answers, to understand how a man who had called their marriage a necessity could now kneel in the mud and weep over her. But her throat was too tight, and her heart was too full of something terrifying and fragile. So she simply nodded and let him help her to her feet, and allowed him to lead her home with his arm wrapped around her as if she might vanish if he let go. That night he came to her chambers. She was sitting by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, still coughing occasionally from the smoke. The doctor had examined her and declared her lungs clear, but she felt hollow, exhausted, stripped of every defense she had built. Alexander knocked softly, and when she did not answer, he opened the door anyway. He stood in the doorway, still in his rumpled shirt, his hair disheveled. He looked younger somehow, less like a duke, and more like a man who had been terrified of losing something precious. "May I come in?" His voice was hoarse. She nodded. He crossed the room and sat in the chair opposite her, close but not touching. For a long while he simply looked at her, his eyes tracing her face as if memorizing it. "I need to tell you something," he said finally, "and I need you to let me finish before you speak." Ilara waited. Alexander drew a shaky breath. "You heard me in the garden that night. You heard me say the marriage was a necessity. That sentiment had no place in it, and I know you have believed ever since that you were nothing more than a transaction to me." Her jaw tightened, but she did not deny it. "What you did not hear," he continued, his voice cracking, "was what I said after you left." She frowned. "I did not hear anything else." "Because you had already gone." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped tightly. "Finch asked me if you knew, and I said you knew enough. But then he asked me something else. He asked if I regretted the arrangement." Ilara's heart began to pound. "And I told him," Alexander said, looking down at his hands, "that the arrangement was the only good thing to come of my father's ruin. I told him that marrying you was the one choice I would make again, 1,000 times over. I told him," his voice dropped to a whisper, "I told him I had loved you since the moment I first saw you, years before our families ever spoke of marriage." The fire crackled. Ilara could not move. "Years before," she breathed. He nodded, still not meeting her eyes. "There was a fair, in the village near your father's country house. You were 17. You were wearing a yellow dress and you were laughing at a puppet show. Your hair was coming loose and you had a smudge of dirt on your cheek, and you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." She remembered that fair. She remembered the puppet show. She did not remember him. "I asked about you," he continued. "I was told you were promised to someone else, a young lord from a neighboring estate. I believed it. I buried my feelings and walked away. And when your father's solicitor approached me years later with a marriage proposal, I thought this was my chance. Not to have your heart because I believed you would never give it to a man you had not chosen, but to be near you, to protect you, to provide for you, even if you never loved me in return." Ilara's eyes filled with tears. "Alexander." "I kept my distance because I was afraid," he said, his voice breaking. "Afraid that if I let myself feel too much, I would shatter when you inevitably grew to resent me. Afraid that you would see my love and pity me for it. So I buried it. I buried it so deep that I convinced even myself it was not there. But it was. It has always been there." He finally looked up, and his eyes were wet, his expression open and defenseless. "I love you, Ilara. I have loved you for years, and I have been a fool, a coward, a cold and distant fool, and I nearly lost you today. I nearly lost you without ever telling you the truth." She was crying now, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. "I thought you did not want me. I thought I was just a duty." "You were never a duty." He moved from the chair and knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "You were the light in this house. You were the warmth I was too afraid to reach for. And when I saw you run into that fire, I realized that if you died, there would be nothing left of me. Nothing." She looked at his hands wrapped around hers, at the desperate grip of his fingers, and felt the last wall inside her crumble. "I stopped hopping," she whispered. "After the ball, I stopped hopping for you. I thought it would protect me." "I know." His voice was thick with regret. "I saw it. I saw you pull away, and it terrified me. I did not know how to reach you. I did not know if I had the right." She pulled one hand free and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. He closed his eyes at the contact, a shudder running through him. "You have the right," she said softly. "You have always had the right. I only needed you to want it." "I want it," he said, his eyes opening, burning with intensity. "I want you, not as a duchess, not as a duty, as my wife, as the woman I love, as the woman I will spend the rest of my life proving myself to if you will let me." She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. The firelight flickered around them, warm and golden. "I will let you," she murmured, "but you must promise me something." "Anything." "Never hide from me again. Never bury your feelings because you are afraid. I would rather face a hard truth than a cold silence." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "I promise. No more silence. No more distance. I will tell you everything every day until you are tired of hearing it." A small, trembling smile touched her lips. "I do not think I will ever tire of it." He kissed her then, not the polite, distant kiss of a duke greeting his duchess, but a real kiss. Tender, aching, full of all the words he had never spoken. She felt the years of longing in it, the regret, the hope, the fierce, desperate love that had been hidden for so long. When they finally pulled apart, he stayed on his knees, holding her hands as if she were something sacred. "I have something for you," he said, and reached into his pocket. He drew out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a ring. Not the heavy family signet she wore on formal occasions, but a delicate band of gold, set with a single pearl. Simple, elegant. "This was my mother," he said. "She told me to give it to the woman I loved when I was certain. I should have given it to you on our wedding day. I was a coward then. I am not a coward now." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Elara looked at the pearl, glimmering in the firelight, and felt something settle deep in her chest. Not the ache of longing, but the quiet, steady warmth of belonging. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "You are beautiful," he replied, "and I intend to spend every day of our future making sure you know it." The weeks that followed were not perfect. Healing was not a single moment, but a slow, careful rebuilding, brick by brick. There were still awkward silences, still old habits to unlearn. Alexander sometimes retreated into his study out of instinct, and Elara sometimes braced herself for coldness that no longer came. But they learned. They learned to talk, really talk about their days and their fears and the small, foolish things that made them laugh. They walked together in the gardens, his hand resting at the small of her back. They visited the tenants side by side, and Alexander saw, with quiet wonder, the love the villagers had for his wife. One evening, as they sat together in the library, Elara remembered the book of poetry and the shawl. "You left those for me," she said, "before the fire." He looked at her, a hint of color rising in his cheeks. "I did not know how to say I was sorry. I thought perhaps small gifts might speak for me." She smiled and leaned her head against his shoulder. "They spoke. I was just too stubborn to listen." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "You were protecting yourself. I understand that now." "We were both protecting ourselves," she said, "and we were both miserable." "Then let us stop protecting," he murmured. "Let us simply love." And so they did. Spring came to Ashford Hall with a riot of blossoms and birdsong. The estate, once weighed down by debt and neglect, began to flourish under their shared care. The cottages were repaired, the village school expanded, the fields planted with new hope. And in the great house on the hill, a duke who had once been cold and a duchess who had once been invisible learned to build a life together, not out of duty, but out of deep, enduring love. On the anniversary of the fire, they stood together in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. "I almost lost you that day," Alexander said quietly. "I still dream about it sometimes." Elara turned and placed her hand over his heart. "You did not lose me, you found me, or rather we found each other." He covered her hand with his own. "I will never stop being grateful for that." She smiled, and it was a smile full of peace, full of quiet joy, full of a love that had been tested and tempered and made stronger by every trial. "Neither will I," she said. And as the last light faded from the sky, they walked back into the house together, his arm around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder. The silence between them was no longer cold or empty. It was filled with everything they had finally learned to say. And in that silence, there was finally, beautifully, no distance at all.